Hello, I'm Eric Singer. This is Argonne's Public Affairs, Science, and Technology Past Fusion Cell Flash Briefing, LEP, or Limited English Proficiency. No current plan to deal with this segment of the community could upend your efforts as a public information officer to relay vital crisis information to them. Connie Mennie is the Communications Administrator for the city of Marysville, Washington. Marysville is 35 miles north of Seattle. She is also the author of published research entitled Emergency Messaging for Audiences with Limited English Proficiency. Thanks for joining us, Connie.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, Connie, explain the research, including the unique situation in your city, which includes the 70,000 population size.
Sure. Marysville is, up until recently, was a fairly small city, but has been growing rapidly in recent years. We've gone from about 16,000 people to 70,000 people in the last 20 years. So it's a big growth thing, and along with growth comes more responsibilities. In our case, it meant that instead of coming under a county emergency management umbrella, that we have our own emergency management program here at the city. And so part of my responsibility is getting emergency messaging out to folks in the event of some kind of life safety thing.
And you have a unique situation with Washington State in particular.
Sure. Based on an incident a few years ago when there were some wildfires in eastern Washington, and a number of migrant workers did not get appropriate evacuation information that they could understand because they did not read English. The Washington State Legislature enacted a new law that basically says if you do emergency management, you need to make sure that it gets out in languages that people understand. If the number of non-English speaking residents or visitors reaches a threshold, it's like 5% of your population, or at least 1,000 people, something like that. And so my job was to figure out how many people in Marysville speak a language other than English, and does it meet that threshold, and what languages do we need to provide this information in. And what I learned was not really surprising, but I didn't know the numbers until we did the research. What we learned was there's actually 34 different languages other than English spoken in our school district, which was a huge number to me. But the only one that met the threshold was Spanish. About 7% of our population, or 5,000 people, speak Spanish as their primary language at home. And if you think about, if something bad happened, an earthquake or wildfires or anything like that, where people need to have information to be safe in their homes or get out of their homes, 5,000 is a lot of people that we can't just pretend that they are going to get the information and hope that they do okay. We need to speak to them in the language that they need to get the information.
What structural changes did you make based on what you learned in this study? What are you going to do differently for crisis communications in your community based on what you learned?
Okay. Actually, based on the state law, there were some regional groups that came together thinking, individually we could all be hacking away at this thing, but since we're all trying to do similar work, let's work together and have a little bit more resources to attack the problem. So, and King County is the neighboring county where Seattle is. Snohomish County is our county. And basically a 3-county coalition around the Puget Sound began meeting, figuring out what resources do we already have translated, what hazards do we know exist in the Puget Sound area, and started sharing those resources. There were a few difficulties along the way in terms of just being able to, between governments, and it had more to do with government security of web resources and things like that. But basically, we're working it out, and we're helping each other say, here's a good resource that we can all use, and when we can do that, we do that. Looking at my own community specifically, we found that we really needed to do more of the outreach with our Spanish-speaking community, which we knew, but we had a very limited staff. So just this year we were able to get an AmeriCorps position, and she's bilingual and has been able to go out and meet with more of our Spanish-speaking community, get folks signed up to receive Marysville alerts, which is our emergency alert system. You can get an alert on your cell phone or by email, or however it works best for you, depending on your circumstances. And you can elect to receive those alerts in languages other than English. So it has really helped to have that position. We're also starting to do more regular communications in Spanish so that folks aren't surprised to hear from the city in Spanish, because that hasn't happened in the past. So it's a bit of a process, but it's a getting to know you, and if you understand you could hear from the city in Spanish and you start to know who the city is, when that bad thing happens, hopefully you'll trust it and be able to rely on that information.
Forming a relationship with those who have limited English proficiency.
Yes, absolutely.
Any advice you'd like to give to other PIOs based on what you're doing and what they could potentially do in their community?
I think the surprising thing to me was that I believe that there are other communities that have a lot more Spanish-speaking people than we do, or any. It doesn't have to be Spanish, whatever the language is in your community. I thought that there would be more readily available information than there is. I was a little bit surprised that we have to make this stuff up now because it hasn't been done, or it hasn't been done well, or it hasn't been shared. I guess the advice would be to find out, who are the trusted folks in your community. And in our case, it was the counselors and the people who work in the schools. They know who our families are who don't speak English very well or at all, and they know how they want to be communicated with and where to meet them, and so that has been really helpful.
Anything you'd like to add?
Going back to those 5,000 people who don't speak English, 5,000 is a lot of people, and we can't just forget about them. We need to figure out how to serve them best, and that's the challenge and the opportunity.
Thanks, Connie. That was Connie Mennie, Communications Administrator for the City of Marysville, Washington, and author of Emergency Messaging for Audiences with Limited English Proficiency. If you'd like to hear previous Alexa Flash briefings that include best practices and tools to help your organization, like the Argonne Past Fusion Cell Facebook page, or connect on Twitter and Instagram at Past Fusion Cell. You can also check out the Past Fusion Cell's online toolkit for useful templates and information. Go to pastfusion.gss.anl.gov.